It's an honor and a pleasure to be here and to celebrate your retirement. I must admit that you have given me quite a challenging task to condense a remarkable story into a brief speech. I will, however, do my best to take you on a short journey through the collapse of our banking system in 2008 and the subsequent and rapid recovery, and provide a few lessons during that journey, which I believe we have learned and must learn and remember. So, in July of 2008, the IMF published a statement on the Icelandic economy. It stated the following: "The long-term economic prospects for the Icelandic economy remain enviable." Now, it didn't last long, just a few months. That's where we faced an unprecedented economic crisis following the complete collapse of our banking system. Now, this is of general knowledge, I believe, to everyone here today. So we became the first advanced economy to experience the full force of the global financial crisis. And this did not happen without build-up. Already in 2007, the total assets of the Icelandic three largest banks had reached an astonishing 1,000% of the country's GDP. And I'm sure that all of you here today have heard the phrase, too big to fail, when banks are in trouble. And you might even have heard it very recently in relation to banks in trouble in the US, or let me name Switzerland. Now, in 2008, you can say that we introduced a new concept, which was too big to save. Not too big to fail, but rather too big to save. Now, I believe in the school books, you will probably read somewhere that you can't let all of the systematically important banks go, at least not at once. That will bring you into very, very serious economic troubles. And true, we had economic challenges, but we tested this theory, I at least would like to argue. So let's remember this: the compounded or the joint amount of these three bankruptcies amounted to something equivalent to the third largest bankruptcy in the US corporate history. Kaupthing alone would have been the sixth largest. So quite a challenge for us. So what followed was a currency and economic crisis characterized by a sharp depreciation of the krona. We had the GDP contraction and the sudden stop in capital flows and growth. So yes, the theory is at least partly true that we would run into trouble, but we didn't really have a choice. So how did it all turn out? That's what I want to address today. So what we did was we came up with the IMF with balanced economic program. It focused on three key areas: the exchange rate and monetary stability, rebuilding the fiscal position, and restructuring a functioning domestic financial sector. Our intentions from the outset were that, as far as possible, the Icelandic taxpayers would not bear the direct burden of excessive private sector losses. Instead, a bail-in banking regulation called the Emergency Act was developed and implemented. The banking system was allowed to fail, and the domestic assets, liabilities, and operations of the failed banks were transferred into new Icelandic-centric banks. This approach shifted the burden onto the industry's uninsured creditors rather than the taxpayers. This was key. To stabilize the exchange rate and address the adverse balance sheet effects, capital controls were imposed as a short-term tool. Well, they were meant to be for the short term. I remember meetings with the IMF. They came in as a rescuer, like a superhero, Said, well, we've done this before, we've seen it all before. This is a list of 137 or what it was collapses we've dealt with in history. So what we need to do is introduce these capital controls. We will lift them in 6 months, trust us. But it wasn't that easy. They lasted nearly a decade. So to cut a long story short, I'm going to read out just about half of what I put down here. I'm going to have to cut the story short. So our main priority was to safely lift the capital controls. And at the time I took office in 2013, by that time the fiscal situation was stabilizing, but I believe that the lifting of capital controls was key to normalizing the economic situation and getting the economy growing again. And in 2015, finally, we put forward a deregulation plan, which included, among other things, measures to solve the settlement of liquidated estates with the so-called stability contributions and also we held auctions for the krona, or the central bank did. That was not easy, it was not undebated, but I think at the end it was a very successful way of lifting controls. But the stability controls were set, at the center of our plan. And let's remember, the IMF estimated that the short-term capital outflow could reach up to 70% of GDP if nothing was done. That was the pressure we were dealing with. Now, a key part to the plan were what we could call voluntary measures, but in fact what we had done was we imposed a tax, and we said, well, if you don't want to pay the tax, you can voluntarily hand over assets. And these were the so-called stability contributions. So under this plan, or this part of the plan, the domestic assets, including almost all equity in Íslandsbanki, one of the new banks, were handed over to the authorities. In total, assets were transferred to the state in the amount of $3.5 billion. And as I mentioned, we also held auctions for offshore kronas, and the gradual and carefully planned approach to lifting controls ensured that there was no FX instability or legal risks, handing over of $3.5 billion worth of assets in US dollars, and all these auctions, we concluded the plan without any legal matter outstanding. This meant that now we had recovered all direct fiscal costs of the financial crisis, all direct fiscal costs, and thus showcasing one of the best recovery rates for governments in history. This obviously played a significant part in our greatly improved debt position, which came in handy when the world was hit by a new crisis with the outbreak of COVID. And that's one of the lessons. We built on the strength of us not being indebted in 2008, and the same was true in 2019, partly because of the successfully implemented plan in relation to lifting of control. Also, our net foreign asset position dramatically changed to the positive. In fact, it had never been as strong in our history. And we can say that maybe by spring 2017, we came to crossroads when we could introduce the full lifting of capital controls. The flow of capital to and from the country was free again, and individuals, companies, and pension funds could invest abroad without restrictions. Now, when we reflect to what has happened, we can draw valuable insights for the future. Number one, build buffers. You have to build buffers for rainy days. That's imperative to be able to react swiftly to crisis. Number two, we must preserve a flexible and outward-oriented economy while also ensuring self-sufficiency. Number three, it's crucial to hold private investors accountable. for bearing the cost of their own risk. Number 4, we should not fear threats of future lockouts from capital markets if your measures are fair, work towards long-term sustainability, and maintain a commitment to transparency and equal treatment under the law. And you can just rest assured, we did receive threats. If you do this, you'll be locked out of the international financial markets. You know, you have to pay up. You have to bail out our problems. And none of this was done. And we tested the theory that we would be locked out, and we were not. Preserving the flexibility of the exchange rate and monetary policy is essential also, as is implementing strong micro and macro-prudential oversight to safeguard our financial system. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was the story of 2008 till 2020. So finally, since I've spent so much time talking about the resilience of Icelanders, I want to take another brief moment to acknowledge Professor Hannes Holmstedt, whose unwavering resilience and commitment has been invaluable to our country. Promoting liberty, economic freedom, and the principles of a free market has been very inspirational to generations of students and other Icelanders, and his works and writings have had an impact on Icelandic political and economic landscape for decades, and will continue to do so for coming years. So congratulations, Hannes, and thank you for all the work throughout an excellent career. Once again, thank you all for being here. I look forward to continuing the conversation later.